All right, everybody, it's our Clow here, and I have an excellent video for you today, very thought-provoking. And before I even get started with it, I do want to state here in the beginning that I have no negative intention with this video. It is in no way meant to mock or ridicule or in any other way degrade anybody who has found success utilizing the 12-step program or through a fellowship with Alcoholics Anonymous. I truly understand the incredible dynamic and multi-dimensional nature of this, just what becomes an experience as you go through it, whether personally or through that of a loved one. But so whatever works for the individual. That's not what I'm getting at here. What I want to address here is I want to show you a collection of information about this organization and its founder, Bill Wilson. And I want to talk about some of the people that he's connected with, such as Aleister Crowley and Frank Buckman, and why it's so important that those people were intertwined in the origin of this incredibly influential organization, which you can see here from the subheader of this Atlantic article, many find to be a pseudoscientific religious organization. But so I want to show you those connections, and I want to talk about the significance of why he chose 12 steps. And again, once we discuss all of these occult pieces, that's really going to fall into place for you. But I want to try to balance that out with information that is based in scientific research and by experts in the field of addiction treatment, looking into this program and talking about what its true success rates are and what the true consequences are for a country and arguably a world who is willing to take this as the premier and dominant approach to treating, again, one of the most dynamic and unique experiences anybody could go through. But so let's take a look here. Look at this opening paragraph. It says, say you've been diagnosed with a serious life-altering illness or psychological condition. In lieu of medication, psychotherapy, or a combination thereof, your doctor prescribes nightly meetings with a group of similarly afflicted individuals and a set of 12 non-medical guidelines for recovery, half of which require direct appeals to God. What would you do? And again, participation in these programs is something that is very, very controversially endorsed through things such as the justice system, in which a treatment program, and it will almost inevitably be a 12-step program, is made a part of, whether it be probation or sentencing, anything along those lines. And so again, what you can see here is that over the years, this 12-step facilitation, TSF, is now applied to over 300 addictions and psychological disorders. And that is absolutely stunning because, as we're going to show you, the numbers do not warrant this to be the premier method. Again, these 12 steps are non-medical and are completely unaltered since their inception back in the 1930s. Not only has the face of drugs completely changed in that time in addiction, but the complete landscape of the world that we live in is now completely different as well. And I understand this idea, this counter argument there, that since this is based in these ideas of higher power and turning oneself over to it in order to overcome these things, that doesn't matter. But when dealing with something such as addiction, especially if we're looking at substance abuse, this is something that should be treated with much, much more care. And I'm going to recommend you a number of pieces throughout here to follow up on. There's a phenomenal documentary that you should watch called The Business of Recovery. It was released just back in 2015. It's absolutely incredible, and it is very mind-blowing. And again, bearing in mind that this industry is valued at $35 billion. Again, something that we'll be talking about more as we go here. But let's look at the importance of questioning this organization. I'm going to show you a figure here. This is from Dr. Lance Dotis. You can see a former professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, is also a very accomplished individual outside of that. And on top of those accomplishments, one of those many things is a former book of his, The Sober Truth, debunking the bad science behind 12-step programs and the rehab industry. Now, what you can see here is he actually peer-reviewed AA's success rate. And so he found in those peer-reviewed studies, the success rate was pegged somewhere between 5 and 10%. It's an average of 1 of every 15 people who enter the program. Now, you contrast that with AA's self-reported figures, and you see that they claim 33% have stayed sober for more than a decade, 12% for 5 to 10 years, 24% for 1 to 5 years, and 31% sober for under a year. You can see here he also cites, of course, these don't take into account the large number of alcoholics who never make it through their first year of meetings and subsequently never completing the 12 steps, which is the definition of success by AA standards. And again, if you also consider the fact that this is the predominant method utilized in most treatment facilities, if it didn't work for them and they left, they probably fell back into those same vicious cycles of addiction. And so the question here, you can see, is how did AA gain such a place of privilege in the American health culture? How did a regimen so overtly religious in nature, with a 31% success rate at best and a 5 to 10% success rate at worst, become the most trusted method of addiction treatment in the country and arguably the world? Now, we're going to look at all sorts of different pieces on this, but let's go back and let's look at some of the connections here that are very interesting between Aleister Crowley and Bill Wilson. So Wilson also dabbled in the occult. And again, for those of you not familiar with Aleister Crowley, he's one of the most, whether you call him infamous or celebrated occultists of the 20th century, founder of 2 separate churches, the OTO and the AA, the Argentium Astrum Silver Star. Again, no coincidence, arguably, that the AA here mirrors the AA of Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, that is the first letter. We have 2 of them. It gives us 11. This is the chief magical number. And I'm going to show you the symbolism of AA, Alcoholics, AA, and how it corresponds to these ancient occult pieces. But before we do, here is Crowley's AA. You can see it has the seal of Babylon for its logo. Again, the 7-pointed star and the immense significance within that number. But notice here as well, we have this recovery chip down here. And we're going to talk about this circle and triangle later. But it does have this nice V in the center of it. Now remember, the V symbolism is incredibly important. It's connected with the deity Typhon, the most powerful deity throughout mythology, destructive force that he was. It is also the idea, right, of the master builder, the 22nd letter of the alphabet. But one of the things that I want to talk about, and that I've talked about in the past, again, the V sign, the peace sign, is that all of this is designed to feed energy into these negative aspects of reality unwittingly. And that way it comes in an almost unlimited supply. And people just feed, and these deities, this energy behind the scenes, it does grow stronger and stronger. And so again, you can see these nice A's here for Crowley's organization. We're going to talk about these other logos in a moment. But so let's get back here though. You see Bill Wilson also dabbled in the occult, as well as seances and LSD. And although he didn't know Crowley personally, he was familiar with his work, primarily through their mutual friend Aldous Huxley. Now, I've talked extensively about Huxley in the past. An interesting side note here, you can see back in October 1930, he did dine with Crowley in Berlin, and it was rumored that on that occasion, Crowley introduced Huxley to peyote, therefore introducing him to mind-altering substances. It is very possible from that point that Huxley then also became very involved with Crowley's other ideas, primarily pertaining to his religion of Thelema. You can see here as well that the use of psychedelics and mind-expanding drugs then characterized much of Huxley's life afterwards, and again all the way to his dying days on his deathbed being injected with LSD. Again, very profound individual, the author of Brave New World, which again comes to life more and more every single day. Talked about that extensively in the past, but let's keep going here. You can see Wilson's friend Dr. Bob, co-founder of AA, was also a member of a new charismatic organization called the Oxford Group. So this is a group in which people found God and spiritual fulfillment by sharing their sins publicly and then making restitution and then recruiting new members. Again, fundamentally, that is the same exact idea that characterizes the AA groups. Now, notice here, Oxford Group was founded by Frank Buckman, who later became infamous as a Nazi sympathizer, quoted as, "I thank heaven for a man like Adolf Hitler who built a front line of defense against the Antichrist of communism." Buckman was also believed to have sexually exploited the young men in his groups. And so we're going to talk much more about Buckman later on and his role in the Oxford Group. But again, here you can see these ideas starting to intertwine between what Crowley presented us with Thelema, what Wilson brings forward with AA. But so take a look here. You have a rundown of these three individuals, Crowley, Buckman, and Wilson. And then in the corner here, the AA's original print. So do notice the circle inside of the triangle symbolism there. We're going to discuss that more a little later on, but let's take a look here. Let's start with what that book is based around, and that is the 12 steps themselves. And before we get into them, and I am not going to go through them one by one, but I do want to lay some foundation here for understanding how they came to be. So you can see here that Wilson was admitted to Towns Hospital 4 times between 1933 and 1934. On his 4th and last day, he showed signs of delirium tremens. Again, this is a very severe condition for people going through intense bouts of alcoholism or just drinking compulsively. He was treated with the Belladona cure. He had his white light spiritual awakening while undergoing this treatment, and it was either on his 2nd or 3rd night, depending on the source. When he was released from Towns Hospital after a 7-day stay, he never drank again. And so the question then here is, what was the Belladona cure? And so if we take a look at this up here, you can see that it was comprised of the deliriant Atropa belladonna, which is also called deadly nightshade. And so let's take a look at what this was. And you can see here consisting of foliage and berries that are extremely toxic. Toxins include atropine, scopolamine, and you can see here they are listed as causing bizarre delirium and hallucinations. So you have one psychedelic in there. Now you see the effects of belladonna include delirium, hallucinations, light sensitivity, confusion, and dry mouth. The second ingredient in the mixture is another deliriant, referred to as henbane or hogsbean or insane root. Really going to struggle on that pronunciation here, hyacinthus. And so you see is a poison plant. Again, I just want you to see that the man who came up with these 12 steps, when he was inspired, he was literally being poisoned. But you can see here that the origins of it and its etymology do come down to this idea of visions, hallucinations, magical powers, so forth. All right, so very interesting that he has those. Now, you do have this third ingredient here, dried bark or berries. And so, again, this is one of the things that actually would make sense because it helps out. So now you see here the mixture of these deliriants, of these poisons, was given every hour, day and night, for nearly 50 hours. The end of the treatment was marked by the abundance of stools, and then castor oil was given to the patient as a further purgative. Treatment was also described as puke and purge. Now you see here as well, every 12 hours the patient was given CC, compound cathartic pills, and blue mass. So it says here blue mass included mercury. And so let's take a look at this here, because you do find out that blue mass actually was very popular with people such as, you can see here, Abraham Lincoln. But notice here, nearly 1/3 of blue mass was mercury. 33% is what's listed here. And again, they vary, but that is clearly the predominant ingredient. And so you have this man who was on the verge of having what is referred to as wet brain from his rampant use of alcohol. But then you have him receiving this Belladona cure consistently. He gets it 4 times. And during each of these undergoings is intermittently given this compound that is 33% mercury. I'm sorry, but his brain and his function overall, you just have to question that. All right. So notice here as well, you also have this bit here saying that another medication utilized during this contained chloral hydrate and morphine, along with 1 or 2 grams of paraldehyde. Again, this is a poison. I do have, if you're just curious about some of these things, you can see from this list here from talks.net of the issues that come through utilizing this particular compound. All right, and that addiction can come from this as well. And so, again, this is what is being used to treat somebody with alcoholism. And this is the treatment that the founder of 12 Steps was undergoing when he became inspired to write them. And so, again, you connect this with what came from how Crowley came about thelema, arguably through heavy use of psychedelic drugs. And it's the same exact thing for Bill W. and his founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to show you an article a little later on here that argues that Bill W. was simply a front for Crowley's ideas to repackage them and slightly rephrase them, but to convey the same exact notions. And again, if you read this article further as well, they do come to the same conclusion. And it's also important to note that although it says that Wilson never drank again, he did die of lung cancer because he was still a compulsive smoker. He was also a compulsive womanizer. And so AA did not, the 12 steps were not able to alleviate him of those compulsive behaviors. You see, it simply redirected them. But so, and again, looking at this idea, this question back here from the Atlantic, how did AA gain such a place of privilege in American health culture? Well, let's look back here to this Rockefeller connection. And so this is back in, let's go to the top here, so you can see this formal invite. Okay, decent menu that they've got going there. But so on February 8th, 1940, representatives were sent from the Rockefellers to listen to Bill speak about his program. Of course, they were asking them for money. But so just something interesting to note here there's 187 invitations that were sent out, 187's the police code for homicide. Very interesting to me. But only 60 people responded. And in any case, what's important to take from this is that afterwards, the Rockefellers did not give them the funding Instead, they gave them acclaim and publication through a number of different outlets. And I want you to see as well here, I have highlighted, although Rockefeller's involvement didn't bring the group the floods of cash it had hoped for, his endorsement gave it some much needed recognition. And many of Rockefeller's friends stayed on as board members of what was then called the Alcoholic Foundation and now serves as the group's general service board. So again, you can see here from the inception and bringing it into the mainstream and the notoriety that came from it afterwards, that Rockefeller instilled his minions there in order to direct this the way it wanted to go. And again, you could easily find countless videos on the connections that Rockefeller has with all of this occult information that I'm connecting Bill Wilson to. But so now with all of that and with Rockefeller now introduced to this here, let's take this one step further. Let's look at why they chose the number 12 for the steps that they would have in this program. And so as you can see here, I mean, I'm going to leave you this article because you should ultimately just read through it for yourself. It's very fascinating. But you can see is what is very important in the magic of this divine number is that at 12, symbolic of the creation of the universe as it represents the division or fractionating of unity into 12 individual distinct sound vibrations or tones. And you can see as well here it says, hence this is a magical or divine number that affects us humans in many more ways than one, for it is the perfect numeral to represent how vibrations affect our DNA and our souls. And so again, very, very fascinating here. And you can see here by the multiplication, if I just bring it up to you, the only true square number happens to be 144, which is a number I have talked about at exhaustive length for you in the past. And so I highly, highly recommend that you go and look through that. But so again here, I just want to scroll through this quickly so you can see how it is repeated throughout ancient history. And as this author states, like no other number. So everything from the 12 hours of the night assigned to Osiris as his companions and ancestors and personifying gods, at whose head was Horus, the rising sun, to Hercules, the sun god, and his 12 labors, 12 Olympians, 12 followers of Buddha, of course, the 12 apostles. It goes on and on. And so again, looking at why that number was chosen. And so you have this bit here. You can see its significance emphasized throughout the Bible. Everything from the 12 tribes of Israel to the 12 Old Testament prophets. You can also see its prevalence throughout the Apocalypse. Again, this is through the Bible. And let's scroll down here because it comes up in ways that, again, thinking of this idea of a perfect harmonic number that goes through our DNA as well as our soul. When you look at how it is through our, right, affecting our daily lives, you see there's 12 months of the year, 12 hours of the day, of night, 12 inches in a foot, 12 grades in school. Of course, the 12-step program, 12 eggs in a dozen. Again, incredibly important occult concept of eggs. Think deviled eggs when looking at this further. You also have these ideas, of course, of 12 signs of the zodiac and this very interesting notion of 12 years of childhood before hitting the teens. And so, again, I will leave you this article. There are all sorts of very interesting quotes discussing how this number is very popular for, again, you can see Templars, 12 Knights of the Round Table, also throughout Freemasonry. But again, this number not chosen by mistake, not arbitrary in the slightest. Just like this symbol on the front here, the circle within the triangle, is also in no way chosen arbitrarily. So take a look here. This is an excellent blog, and it's talking about the idea of a triangle within a circle as an ancient occult symbol dating back to the ancient civilizations. Just as other occult symbols and beliefs have been used and modified by the secret societies and satanic groups over the centuries, this symbol has also seen the same transformation over the ages. And so if you look through here, you're going to find some very interesting things on the different breakdowns and the different variations that we see often of this symbolism, whether it has that eye of Horus in the center of it, or whether it is simply part of sacred geometry. You can also see it found throughout ancient Greek and Egyptian cultures, with the bronze serpent who is eating his own tail. Also information here about the Rosicrucians, again, a highly influential occult organization, utilizing this same symbolism. You can see here that it is very well permeated the Christian religion. And of course, many people always talking about the inversion of those two ideas of Jesus and Lucifer. Again, Lucifer literally translating as light bearer. But I want you to see as well here this very important idea that they put forward. It says one of the main agendas of the Illuminati is to proliferate the use of occult symbols and spread them throughout our daily lives. This plan is discreet, and with the general public not knowing the true meanings of these symbols, it is an easy plan for them to promote and worship Satan without facing opposition. One of their favorite places to put these images is on government or official logos, where they will be recognized and acknowledged by the public as a symbol of authority and domination over their lives. And so, again, you can see all of these wonderful examples that he has comprised here. And you also have, of course, he wants to talk about its connection with AA. You can see here that he states it as a well-known Illuminati front organization, so it should come as no surprise that they would adopt an Illuminati symbol to depict themselves. Now, listen to this description here, and what he's arguing is that their rationale mirrors somebody who would be justifying this to represent a satanic ritual. He says the equilateral, again, this is the justification for why AA uses the circle around the triangle. It says the equilateral triangle represents the three-part answer: unity, recovery, and service to a three-part disease: physical, mental, and spiritual, while the circle represents wholeness or oneness. The body should be triangular, stable, the mind circular, open. The triangle represents the means for generation of good energy and is the most stable physical posture. The circle symbolizes serenity and perfection and the source of unlimited potential. Together, they represent the perfect union of mind and body. And so, for those of you who've ever read anything from Crowley, you know that sounds just like something that he would write. The very expressive language that is used there, very articulate. Again, these writings on good energy, stable posture, all of his work on yoga, and what that has to do with aligning oneself with the proper energies. And of course, you see here down below AA acknowledging the symbol's origins, and again just saying that it was something for warding off spirits of evil, and that AA absolutely can identify with using a symbol for that purpose. And so again, read through here. I do have one more set of quotes here, again just tying this into Freemasonry, seeing that triangle within a circle dominates the pages of Masonic literature and is also used in their most popular imagery. It is said they refer to it as the symbol of the Kabbalion and have adopted it for from Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece. And so if you take a look through here, of course, you can see all of these very prevalent places in which we see this circle and the triangle inside of it, whether it has the eye or any other number of pieces in between there. Of course, the number 33, the master Masonic number, Crowley as well, a 33rd degree Freemason. As I've discussed in the past, chapter 33 of his Book of Lies is titled Baphomet. And again, remember that is simply a deity that energy is fed into for any given purpose. And so again, noticing this here, you do have this nice piece at the end. And it's just great because it's a section of a conference room of a Masonic hotel located in London. And again, you can read more on all of that. This is just very fascinating information to me. And again, I'll maybe do something in the description box showing you a bit on the gematria that goes with that phrase at the bottom there. But so take a look at this over here. And again, I'm going to kind of cruise through this because we've gone over so much of this information already. This is just talking about the similarity and of the symbols, the circle and triangle between Crowley's organization, the Fraternatus Argenteum Astrum, which we talked about earlier with the Seal of Babylon, the AA on it. And you also see one of the symbols used by Crowley to identify his fraternal order is the Masonic triangle within the circle with the acronyms AA inscribed below it. Of course, as we've been discussing, that is the symbol of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what's very interesting about this author, this is actually the individual who puts forth the argument that Bill Wilson was just a complete front for Aleister Crowley. And he notes the similarities between not only titles but writing styles, because as you see, Crowley's very notorious book, Diary of a Drug Fiend, predated Alcoholics Anonymous, big book by 17 years, but they go over the same exact ideas. And so the important idea here is that in Bill's story, you can see that he describes things very similar limerick style as Crowley would discuss things in his Diary of a Drug Fiend. And so again, he just talks about the identical philosophy behind these two, the ideology as it were. Of course, you can see here everything in Drug Fiend going and describing the spiritual program of the character Basil, who's identified in the book as Satan himself. And he wants one to be oneself, and the price of that is to abandon the false ideas that one has of oneself. So to really bridge into this here, it's interesting to note, and this comes up with Crowley quite a bit, this idea of him wanting to always psychologically break people in order to control them. And I attribute this much more to government organizations, things such as MK Ultra, mind fragmenting, that there is very compelling research around. But I want you to see here that they talk about AA's aim is to bring about a similar psychological break in the patient as would have been found in the ritual practices of what many would regard as Satanism. You have the psychological break is referred to in AA as a complete psychological change. The techniques used by treatment centers to cause a psychological break involve cutting off the patient from his familiar social setting, restricting contact with family and friends, as well as restricting access to reading material, radio, and television. The patient lives in a situation of inferiority and is regularly reproached by his counselor and group members for using defense mechanisms, often called thinking errors, such as humor, self-pity, anger, etc. The patient is bombarded with repetitive slogans and phrases. This is absolutely true. The idea is to create sufficient stress to cause a psychological collapse, at which point the patient becomes susceptible to influence. The desired goal is for the patient to abandon free will and to accept the program. The most commonly known term for this form of this process of psychological restructuring is brainwashing. And so it's very interesting here. He goes on to discuss how we see this throughout the media and pop culture, and compares Ozzy Osbourne, again, heavy metal rock artist, has an album titled Diary of a Madman, which he says is a direct reference to Crowley's book, Diary of a Drug Fiend. And also this idea of one of his albums being entitled Blizzard of Oz, and that being a reference to the popular family film The Wizard of Oz. So it says, in turn, the film The Wizard of Oz is full of occult and Masonic symbolism. The term Oz, as used in the film title, is taken from Crowley's book, Liber Oz. Oz is Crowley's transcription of the Hebrew word for goat. So now on my band channel, I did talk about the Wizard of Oz pretty extensively at one point. But so just to show you, just again, this screenshot, this is from within the first 5 or so minutes of the movie. But Dorothy with this just fantastic pentagram directly behind her inside of Professor Marvel's little doom hut here. Again, skulls all around the place. There's owl symbolism that you can find if you watch the scene. But again, as he was stating, just that Oz transcribing to goat, Crowley's connection there. We have the pentagram often associated with the goat of Mendes. Again, the 5 points. But just fascinating stuff. I want to read to you just one more excerpt from this article. It says, as stated in step 3 of the 12 traditions of AA, human will is of no value whatsoever. This serves the Masonic Illuminati New World Order agenda perfectly. Another theme emphasized throughout AA is the proclamation that the AA member is powerless. As governments and elitists endeavor to disempower citizens via corrupt banking practices, taxation, legislation, corrupt corporate influence, and censored and controlled media, a significant portion of a population will engage in the use of alcohol and drugs. And so, yeah, absolutely. He then goes on to talk about how these ideas that since the Federal Reserve was put into effect in 1913, that we saw a huge spike in these leaps to take away certain things from us. So look at Prohibition, which I believe started in 1920, and again 7 years after the Federal Reserve founding. But so again, you see the stock market collapsing. I believe it's 16 years after the Federal Reserve came into place there. Again, the Tower card is very important. And you see us going through the Great Depression. But you see he writes here, this was an attempt by the elitist Illuminati banking families, Rothschild and Rockefellers, at imposing fascist control. You also, again, have just this idea of taking away things that were once legal, such as alcohol, such as cocaine, such as ecstasy, such as any number of substances that were at one point essentially medically condoned to use for treatments, but that were later taken away. But so you can see here, though, that he says that this is all part of a design. And again, a lot of people have said this. It says this explains why the CIA is known to allow cocaine and heroin to hit the streets of America to this day. If America is fighting a war on drugs, what side does it presume to be on? The scenario is this simple. 1, illegalize drugs and alcohol. 2, make them readily available. Then 3, force the intentionally created criminals into a program that requires them to give up their free will. It's talking about AA. He says this problem reaction solution is a perfect example of the dialectic philosophy as propounded by the Bavarian Illuminati Friedrich Hegel. Now, this problem reaction solution or order out of chaos ideology has been the catalyst for a multitude of artificially Masonic / Illuminati created conflicts in the last century alone. Again, information to substantiate this is all over the place, but you can again look through this article here. There are some very interesting points, and so what he ultimately comes to the conclusion here of why Bill W. was necessary to mainstream Crowley's ideas brought forward in Thelema is that Crowley had made too much of a negative reputation for himself, claiming to be the Antichrist and being accused of just outright deplorable acts. And so if they wanted to make this system work and be something that went throughout all of these different generations and decades moving forward, that they would have to pick somebody a little more well suited for the job, at least from a public perception standpoint. Now again, he also talks about the reason why Crowley couldn't openly be the one to do this is because all the way up till his dying day, he was said to be struggling with severe heroin and cocaine use. And so again, that's not the front that you want for a program such as Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, all of that massively, massively fascinating to me. And what I want to do here in the second half of this video, just very quickly for you, I want to look at this little bit tying Frank Buckman in here. I want you to see, this is from Glenn Close, and the article is talking about her struggling with her life after growing up in a cult. You can see she said the cult impact was so great that for years she wouldn't trust any of her own instincts because her beliefs had all been dictated to her. Now, in any case, you can see here that when she was 7 years old, her dad, a Harvard-educated doctor, joined the religious group known as the Moral Rearmament. Now, this is the second kind of 2.0 version of the Oxford group, which we were talking about Frank Buckman earlier, the man who was the Hitler enthusiast as well as the one who stood accused of molesting young boys. Now, notice here, the way that Buckman is described is a violently anti-intellectual and possibly homophobic evangelical fundamentalist from Pennsylvania who argued that only those with special guidance from God were without sin and that they had a duty to change others. What began as an anti-war movement gradually turned into a possessive and exclusionary force. You can see here, again, it's just questioning how much influence Buckman actually had as time went on. And if we take a look at this over here, this is actually a very interesting write-up of Buckman's history, as well as his essentially just detachment from reality more and more, how he structured the Oxford group to be in a way. I mean, just take a look at the cult speak here. Redefining everyday terms for group members like sanity, guidance, and surrender. And so in this way, he could craft a message that sounded innocuous or agreeable to outsiders while also communicating extremist messages to indoctrinated members. This is how it works. That is the fundamental for how this all goes forward. All right, you see this enabled Buckman to simultaneously exert mental control over members while sounding ecumenical or benign to the outside world. So now, again, if you go through this article here, you will find some very fascinating things about Buckman, what a terrible individual ultimately he was. But again, stating that this is who, right, the cult that Glenn Close was a part of, and I know it's bizarre, and again, this is an incredibly occult image here, this nice 18 weeks only right above her, of course, that being the moon card, 18, of course, 6 plus 6 plus 6, if we wanted to take that one step further. But it's very interesting to me. I don't know if I had highlighted it in this article, but here it is right here. Just something to bring up, just something because this is interesting to me, that the film that it puts in blue lettering, Fatal Attraction, and again, this is arguably her most popular film that she appeared in, but do notice here that the release date for it is cited as this nice September 11th, 1987, so a nice 9/11, right? And again, remember that's the same day that... God, totally spacing the name. Movie with Full Metal Jacket. Excuse me. Excellent movie from Kubrick. Talked about it extensively in the past, but that's the same day it was released over in the UK. It was released September 12th in the US, but interesting date there. Also notice the running time for Fatal Attraction is 119 minutes. Of course, inversion, a favorite of people in these occult groups. To say something is Kabbalistically written when it is backwards, you get that nice 9/11 there. So again, incredibly important numbers and ideas linking all of this together. I don't know what Glenn Close will be playing in a role here, but will be something very important. She's got like 6 movies that are due to come out this year, so very interesting to say the least to me. But so in any case, let's take a look at this over here. Just talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and drug use in the country. So I want you to see that the industry, although it has grown exponentially, again, valued to be a $35 billion industry, and how it keeps expanding and expanding, yet at the same time, the drug problem keeps growing and growing. All right, you see 23.5 million Americans are said to be addicted to drugs and alcohol. And I'm confident that that is a modest number. And so that ineffectiveness arguably is due to the actual nature of this program and how it is founded in no scientific evidence, but is simply an occult just headpiece, centerpiece in so many ways to keep people oppressed. Now, again, you can see here, this article from Forbes is talking about the documentary, The Business of Recovery, which you should absolutely watch. And do note here, these are more quotes from Dotis, again, talking about that 10% success rate. That's irritating. But let me go down just a little more here, because these are some very important points I feel that they note throughout this film. And the other thing with these programs is they are so ungodly expensive that they bankrupt many people who are trying to put family members or themselves through these programs that, mind you, have a 5 to 10% success rate. And there's no scientific evidence to back any of these claims that they make for the strides that they claim this program is accountable for in helping the individual. And so I just want you to see all of that. And I actually, for the last piece here, I mean, again, and just look at this. It's all this stuff on the forging of these clinics. Betty Ford and Hazelden now merged into the same thing. And again, they stay nonprofit so that they can be off the radar, so that they can do very dirty referrals between each other, give each other business. Doctors who refer patients to certain treatment programs get 10%, upwards of 10% of the cut for that treatment. And again, you can see here, ranging modestly, the low end ones from $15,000 to $26,000 for a 30-day treatment plan. It's a college education and then some. And especially if you get into these higher ones, and especially if you talk to people who don't just go to one. Most people dealing with this go to several rehabs if that is the road that they choose to take. And they don't give you a discount the more times you go. There's no more empathy for you the more times you go. It's the same exact thing. And they will never tell you that it is not going to work for you. They'll just tell you that you're not committed to sobriety. The institution, the program itself takes zero accountability. And it's staying in its nonprofit status is definitely a piece that lets it go unmonitored. For more on the, I cannot recommend this Business of Recovery documentary to you enough. And again, taking a look at this over here, just wondering how it has gotten such a stranglehold. Note here that when the Big Book was first published in 1939, it was met with wide skepticism from the medical community. The American Medical Association, as well as the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, described it as curious combinations of organizing propaganda and to something that had next to no meaning in understanding what alcoholism is and how to properly deal with it, stating that it's all surface material. And so you see here that they say they realized early on, this is the AA founders, that to establish true legitimacy, they would eventually need to earn the imprimatur of the scientific community, which they did with aplomb, largely by manufacturing an establishment for addiction scholarship and advocacy that did not previously exist. They created a space for AA to dictate the conversation. And so this should sound incredibly familiar to you, because this is absolutely the same road taken by most any other group. Look at the tobacco industry, right? You fund institutions to say what you want them to say, and this is why people don't trust scientific research. It's not that science itself is bad, it's that the funding and the will and the intention going into it is not always genuine. And in a world that is dictated by money, those are absolutely the findings that we will see. But so look at this here. The National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, one of the foremost American advocacy agencies for recovering addicts, was founded in 1944 by Marty Mann. Again, these are very important numbers. That 44, MM is 44, but a wealthy and well-connected Chicago debutante. And this first female member's contested piece, so I really don't feel the need to reiterate that. But, so you can see here, Dodds writes, the strength of self-reported success in popular articles that AA received gave them the ability to win a Lasker Award, which is given by the American Public Health Association for outstanding achievement in medical research or public health administration. And bearing in mind that they'd done absolutely zero research. Again, you can see Dodds is irritated too. This despite no mention of any scientific study that might prove or disprove the organization's efficacy. But it was nevertheless a marked moment in AA's history, the moment it entered the medical establishment and by proxy gained implicit trust from the American public on matters of alcohol abuse. You can see here 2 decades later, in 1970, Congress passed a landmark bill called the Comprehensive Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism Prevention, Treatment, and Rehabilitation Act, precipitating the establishment of the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, part of the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Among those testifying to the lawmakers in support of the bill were Marty Mann and Bill Wilson. And again, you can see all of these things. These are excellent articles that I have for you here. And again, putting forward this idea that the idea is not to completely dismiss the program, but to look at it in a realistic light and ask oneself, why isn't there something more effective? Why is this the premier option that seems to be gaining more and more strength, but it is based on anecdotal evidence? Now you can see here, and if you compare this concept right here to belittling alcoholism and drug use, and you pull it back to Frank Buckman and some of the things that he stood accused of, this confession as comedy ideas, but again, demeaning, trivializing, all of these very important things. But so you see that the ultimate conclusion that they write is that the addict is disposable or a recyclable punchline, and coming from TV shows. When as a culture we ascribe the addict the lowest possible social value, is it any wonder why the flock to a fellowship of equally alienated individuals with common lived experiences, organizations like AA? Is it any surprise that they go there? No, absolutely not. But that doesn't mean that there's something better and more effective that they could use. All right, so this video is running a little long. I'm not going to read any more on this, but again, crippling society is from the inside out through this on so many levels. And what I ultimately feel this has to do is this masterful idea of solvet coagula, which means to dissolve and coagulate. Something must be broken down before it can be built up. And that's exactly what they're doing, breaking down aspects of society in order to build up others and have a blind eye towards them. And of course, you can tie this in one step further, this dissolving the body and building up the spirit, transcending. But so I do want to end this, though, with this excerpt here from Lance Dodds talking on the Tom Woods show. And he pretty much summarizes a lot of the things that I've said. And so I really hope that this video gave you something to think about. It's a very, very important subject to me, and especially it should be to more people in general. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this. I hope it was insightful for you. Again, never absolute, but bringing you my relative perspective on these things and this information. So let's take a listen to this clip here.
You would hope so. Bill Wilson started AA. He wrote the book Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1930s. And incidentally, AA has hardly changed at all since then. It is the only area of psychiatry, psychology, or medicine that is exactly unchanged since the 1930s. He started it because he had alcoholism, and one day he said he had a hallucinatory experience. Incidentally, he was on hallucinogens at the time because that's what they treated things with in those days. But he had a hallucinatory experience that God appeared to him and basically said, don't drink. That's a kind of a summary of it. But the point is, he said, aha, I have seen the light, and what I need to do is now bring this message to all fellow sufferers. And the AA steps themselves came from a group that Bill Wilson belonged to called the Oxford Group. The Oxford Group was founded around the turn of the 20th century and was a fundamentalist Christian group based on first century Christian tradition, which said basically that the ills of mankind are due to being distant from God. And that is exactly where Bill Wilson got his 12 steps from, which he said. So the 12 steps, which are about turning to God or a higher power and turning your life over to the higher power and basically getting closer to a higher power, was an exact repetition of the Oxford Group. And so that's how he developed the program. Importantly to me, although Bill Wilson stopped drinking, he had multiple other addictive and compulsive behaviors, which he had for the rest of his life, and in fact ultimately killed him. He was a terrible cigarette smoker, and he died of lung disease, and he was also a womanizer. This is well known. So as a person interested in psychology and psychoanalysis, the thing that I have been mainly working on for the past 30 years is understanding the psychology of addiction. And when you understand it, you see that there is nothing magical about alcohol, that this is alcoholism is a compulsive behavior, which is the same as compulsions to gamble or compulsions to use the internet, or even compulsions that we don't think of as addictions, like a compulsion to clean your house. Psychologically, these are all the same. So it's important to understanding Bill Wilson that although he stopped drinking, he never really treated his problem. He just switched over to other compulsive behaviors, which is a very common thing. So his idea that he had come up with this spiritual solution to alcoholism was never true.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I've heard that before.
So again, I'm going to leave you the links for all of this. This interview is fantastic. Please look into Lance Dotis's book, The Sober Truth, as well as the documentary, The Business of Recovery. These are fantastic resources for you. Again, thank you so very much for taking the time to watch this video, and please be well.